Create GIGER, an auto-ethnographic presentation. My multidisciplinary practice is a generative form of magic and a self-reflexive expression of it, exploring the art of transformation and its methodologies, technologies, agencies and implications through art-praxis, as-gnosis, informed by astrological, philosophical and metaphysical perspectives. Through my work, I explore magical metaphysics, build architectural installations, arrange votive sculptures as haptic hymns, draw objects and entities from imaginal ecologies, sing improvised mantric glossolalia, write atemporal quests through emotional historicism, perform non-denominational ritual theatre, and create oniric film poems and film essays, born through the ambulation of a gnostic-psychogeography. Today I present a selection of new and old works as part of an auto-ethnographic process I've been working through this year. After a summer spent writing to the prompts of my proposal printed in the programme, I gradually realised I would not be able to do justice to the many topics I described in such a short slice of time, so I focused here on GIGER and GIGER-adjacent works, and saved those other topics for future presentations, but feel free to ask about any of them at the end if you like. Autodidactic auto-ethnography. As opposed to an ethnographic attempt towards objectivity, auto-ethnography embraces and explores subjectivity. Rather than removing the self, I dive into the prismatic primacy of my personhood as generative arts praxis through self-reflexive language, Mercury, imaginal imagery, Neptune, and exoskeletal costume, Pluto. Here I invoke Hans Rudi Giger's ghost as a Plutonian psychopomp via an aeronautic embodiment to guide my navigation through procreative encounters with imaginal ecologies. Giger's Gnostic capacity to world the shadow as a transformative vector for the evolution and expression of the transpersonal panspermia of celestial, terrestrial, and infernal realms fascinates me. His works potently negate our tendency for self-deception and enable a reappraisal of those occulted primal powers society abjects into the fertile shadow of Scorpio. This self-reflexive auto-ethnographic presentation, constellated between a host of cinematic references and contextualized within the scorpionic archetypes of an astrological metaphysics, both ancient and futuristic, facilitates and situates a pantemporal exploration of some of my own magical experiences through arts praxis. Esoteric Narcissus and the Water Door. This auto-ethnographic process could be dismissed as a narcissistic knitting of sympathies between myself and an artist whose capacities vastly exceed my own. Narcissism is synonymous with pathological self-obsession, named after a surface reading of the myth of Narcissus, asteroid 37117, and his apparent love of himself at the cost of all others, especially the nymph Echo, asteroid 60, who died unrequited. Although exoterically doomed to be the poster boy of narcissism, Narcissus also embodies an esoteric ontology. He pondered his reflection in a pool, not a mirror, peering through his silhouette, permeating the Libran idealization of love, entering the scorpionic transmutation of the abyss. An auto-voyeuristic psychopomp whose obsessive self-reflexivity transcended the immanent boundaries of his figuration, searching for gnosis in realms beyond knowledge, unable to connect to those immersed in the dream of life, longing for a skeleton key to an inner door through self beyond it. Procreative co-creation. The original imagery I present was created using the iPad's digital painting program Procreate, which facilitates iterant opportunities to create, rearrange, duplicate, and modify layers of imagery endlessly. The iPad is a dark mirror forged from the black blood of the unremembered bodies of megafauna and microflora, new alloys violently rent from ancient ores and powered by a slice of trapped lightning. A haunted window, the guilty byproduct of industrial capitalism, is as such a fitting tool for procreative necromancy. Through this window I called to GIGER to be with me. Black mirrors have long been used to communicate with non-bodied entities. Artist Tom Railton's Simply Black, 2016, an obsidian glass smartphone napped like a Neolithic flint, neatly collapses this telecommunicative space between the ancient and the futuristic, deftly highlighting the archontic algorithms that gaze upon and recreate us as battery-farmed digital ghosts through a theatre of distraction towards the somnambulant Gaionic matricide of our planet. Despite Giger's devotion to the ethereal, contactless airbrush, I can't help but wonder whether he would have explored the technique of these new technologies. The iPad's Retina liquid crystal screen sports 10,000 colours, and through Retina I met her daughter Fovea. Foveanic fecundity. Around age 2, the fovea develops, that tiny portion of the inner eye dedicated to focus, whose centricity unchecked breeds autocracy via the devaluation of the interiority of our introception and the spatiality of our proprioception. Fovea, daughter of Retina, the primordial peripheral goddess, is the psychoamniotic flesh lens through which light and its absence are worlded. When invoking Fovea, the avatar of inner sight, imagination, hypnagogia, and those holographic worlds, only accessible through radical internality, she brought me into the eye to paint my seeing of her and her me. As the bilious dawn of nuclear iridescence we glimpse in the nocturnal eyes of cats, owls, and bats. Caught in the apocrypha of flashlights that illuminate the implausible night rainbow of reflective sight. Giger as guide. After being with Fovea, I invoked Hans-Rudi Giger, whose preternatural ability to wield the shadow through art, by traversing its topography and embodying its inhabitants, continues to haunt the aesthetic vocabulary of our embodied encounters with, and transformations through, the interstellar Plutonic ecosystem of Scorpio. Of all of the zodiac, the Scorpion alone can see the stars, otherwise masked by the solar theatre of the day. The night reveals those celestial energies that ghostwrite much of the exoteric drama we populate, considered by some to be the archontic mechanisms of a gnostic fatalism, whereby the solar system is understood to be a cosmic clock that is weaving consciousness, etching it into organic embodiment to undergo tutelary transformations via a predetermined cosmic choreography. If we think with the Western conception of states of consciousness as stacked strata of being, the exoteric, obvious consciousness we ambulate, the esoteric, unobvious subconscious we explore through dream, trance, ritual, psychedelics and sex, and the occulted hidden unconscious that arguably ghostwrites much of the drama we populate, we may observe Giger's ability to traverse these states of being with the ambassadorial permissions of a psychopomp, and briefly explore his capacities within the context of an astrological metaphysics that maps the interrelationship of those planetary agencies that typify these abilities. 1. Mercury's conscious ability to voice the mind. 2. Neptune's subconscious ability to dream inspiration. 3. Pluto's unconscious ability to uncover and illuminate our deep impulses, ideas, and imprints that must then be ferried through the subconscious to the attention of the conscious, to be integrated towards the reclamation of agency, if we are to enable a radical transformation of the self, which, as magicians, we must. Mercury, Neptune, Pluto, thrice great Giger. Giger's ability to fluidly transgress the moral taxonomies of normativity by lubricating our descent through the seductive gravity of horror into the erotic fecundity of the shadow, and vice versa, offers us an opportunity to gaze into the coitus of Gothic landscapes, alive in ceaselessly slow sex with themselves, procreating in the primordial panspermic darkness that begat all life, and into which all life rots. This invocation of Giger's shade as guide is akin to Andrei Tarkovsky's film Stalker, whose protagonist's questing ambulation permeates the boundaries of an imaginal zone of profound and perilous psychic portent. The flora-faunic genitalia of Terra Incognita. If Giger was a plant, he would be Nepenthes black naga, the carnivorous fluted pitcher plant whose hermaphroditic orality embodies both phallic and yonic form, enticing insects into the digestive abstraction of its acidic anti-womb. I find the naga particularly interesting in its naming, as it refers to a serpent or dragon, and echoes the apex predator of Giger's most prolific progeny, the xenomorph that stars in Ridley Scott's film Alien. Giger's deaf visual language invokes an orchestra of orifices, whose silent screams are hymns to the deafening chaos of being, and before I had the words to word it, I felt its totality at 10 years old. My prepubescent introduction to Hans Rudi Giger arrived when I was 10 years old and tall enough to reach a shelf of art books in my parents' study, in which they toiled long nights and forgotten weekends doing desktop publishing for an annual monoclonal antibody catalogue in aid of funding our summers of explorative travel to and through Botswana, Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Beijing, Kowloon, and Hong Kong, all before I reached 14. That tumultuous age of anxious instability we all summit when Saturn, whose 29-year orbit opposes the natal position it held at our birth, through which we rally against the oppressive structures of our elders to find a freedom in which to patent something of our own anarchic individualism. Hormonal hieroglyphs. From a young age, Giger was deeply interested in the celestial star law of Egyptian artifacts. The physio-energetic metamorphosis of puberty summons the incandescent nebula of cosmocoital powers that enact the maturation of genitalia instrumental in the co-creation of incarnate life. Like the caterpillar whose body liquefies in the psychedelic amniosis of the chrysalis, there is a protean primacy to the figurative obliteration whose unremembering and consequent reimagining births a very new self. The butterfly, an angelic aria of fleeting flight, is far more explicitly exoteric in its transformation than we tend to observe in the animal kingdoms, but nevertheless is equally matched by the inner esoteric opera of the human teenager. These transformative powers rage like solar flares in arced flumes, barely contained within the brittle boundaries of our fledgling selves, often giving rise to errant expressions and entities, from the animated kinesis of possessed cutlery to the forming of fully fledged psychic egregores, energetic entities that embody the personified particularity of the trauma blocks that are inhibiting the dissolution and recapitulation of self imperative to our becoming forevermore. The bibliomancy of autonomous sensory meridian response. Even at such a young age, Giger's book felt like a celebrant lament to the erotic embodiment of consciousness and the responsibility of creating life enfleshed to die. Like cathedrals, libraries, and graveyards, his book inspired silence, but not the kind born of the habitual social momentum of our conforming to and performing in the architecture of inhibitive normativity. This was the deafening silence of awe. Leafing through it, I became aware of the subtle sensate specificity of the paper's almost indiscernible texture through the spiral sensitivity of my fingerprints, whose ridged topography created a conglomerate acuity. I buried my nose in the prone spine to flood my nasal passages with the solvent ghosts of the printing process. A sweet, soft turpentine ported me into an alchemical realm of industrial reproduction, where briefly haunted machines instrumentally proliferated Giger's dreaming. Latterly, the energy I felt blooming through this psycho-haptic encounter would be coined in the eponymous acronym ASMR. Autonomous sensory meridian response defines the insubordinate feelings of numinous eroticism extant in the subtly potent orality of the hushed whisper, scored to the rapping of nails on desks, akin to the fever-pitch situational eroticisms that punctuate Bataille's obscenity. I breathed Giger in through unblinking eyes, agape at the atavism of ancient fears, enraptured, akin to kneeling in wet prayer at the altar font of creation. Every sense engaged, their unanimity inciting unexplored and unexpressed topographies of my being to awaken, ripen, and pay attention. Cosmocoital, subaqueous, scorpionic phenotypes. This year, after spending time with Phaidon's GIGER respective, I began a process of being with him through digital painting. I assumed I was drawing these entities into being, but as they became clear, I got the overwhelming feeling of being watched by them as they dressed themselves in my imagination. Through a formal exploration of Giger's technique, I improvised with digital airbrush tools to world what came forth. The closest comparable reference to the phenomenon of worlding these entities would be those submariners who search for life in the deepest trenches of our seas, whose roving lights reveal occulted entities as yet unseen. Hermaphora Angelicus. After the monochromatic entities I drew observed me, I was granted entry into a polychromatic energetic space that precedes and proceeds them, an atemporal, primordial resonance in which pre-bodied, hermaphroditic angelic genitalia pulse through sound, colour, taste and touch, whose realities are also explored by artist Jordan Edge. As I captured snapshots of their undulating flux through the iPad's 10,000 colours of liquid crystal, a layered metalog with retina enabled trance states akin to those reached through the contemplation of Hindu tattvas. Plasmate procreative portals pulsing, shivering gelatin hymns to the primordial eroticism of being. A space touched by Gaspar Noé's film Enter the Void, which likely found elements of inspiration in the audiovisual mystical states invoked by the abstract films of Jordan Belson. Embodied. I am currently collaborating with and being mentored by Nicole Vivian Watson, who studied the Japanese dance form Buto under the tutelage of Yoshito Ono. First pioneered by Hichikata Tatsumi and Kazuo Ono, Buto was an anarchic embodied reaction to the formal conservatism of Japanese dance theatre, capable of enacting radical corporeal catharsis by embodying, expressing, and transmuting traumas. Enunciating the whispered scream of an atomic angel only the fallibility and fragility of the mortal body could pronounce. Buto's inimitable capacity to irreconcilably strobe between an expression of horror and beauty ruptures the banality of binary assertions. My time being with Nicole is enriching my understanding of embodiment, improvisation, and praxis as key elements of opening up to symbiotic cohabitation with other agencies and entities that populate our more than human world to co-create meaning. Alkistis Demek's inimitable work and her presentation Mantic Visions and the Subtle Eye of Matter are a huge inspiration to me and set my hope to make an art of my writing aflame. Re-embodied. Artist, writer, and director Masamune Shiro's concept designs in the anime Ghost in the Shell are examples of Gnostic explorations of metaphysical aesthetics that combine to be of great inspiration to me and my costuming. Dressed. In past works Ancestral Armour 2021 and Sky-Clad Lad 2020, I created ritual costumes as a way to embody symbolic ancestral histories and skeletal interiority, and I now seek to use ritual costume to enter expanded realms. I felt compelled to make an exoskeletal immersive suit for necromantic aneromancy from both leather and plastic, two byproducts of death, the origins of the first contemporary and the latter ancient. The making of this plutonic suit that I will be wearing this afternoon has enabled me to richly invest in a future of scorpionic exploration as my progressed natal sun is due to step into 3 decades of Scorpio next week. I am deeply interested in costumes and particularly their magical capacities to traverse historical fact and futuristic fiction. The immersive temporality accessed from period couture to futuristic cosplay fascinates me. Costume designer Aiko Ishioka's astounding work continues to be a huge inspiration to me, especially her musculature-inspired armour in Bram Stoker's Dracula and the immersive suspension suits she created for The Cell, which was by Tarsum Singh. Signs and synchronicities. I want to close by sharing some synchronicities with you. I feel that the word coincidence can often become a gravestone for meaning. For once pronounced, its often inobvious dismissiveness usually stops the unfolding of future meaning. Synchronicities, on the other hand, are open celebrations of personal meaning that often generously illuminate largely esoteric or occulted metaphysical aspects of an expanded reality that we are in symbolic relationship to through many tangential tributaries whose symphonic strata are collaboratively becoming through us always. On arriving at my new home at Dartington Hall in Devon, I serendipitously met a composer called Oleg Fruchter, who, unbeknownst to me, had this in his living room. Before I left Newcastle in July, my home of 37 years, I found this second-hand solid silver scorpion ring, whose leg was recently replaced for me in Totnes by my local jeweller Omar. Coincidence is a word often used to kill meaning. Synchronicities are seeds, and the more you love them, the bigger they grow. Thank you all for your time. Yeah. If anyone has any questions, shoot.
Do you want to talk a bit more about what you're going to do this afternoon?
Yes, sure.
Is that maybe we can encourage people to come?
Yeah, absolutely. Ever since I was a kid, I've been collecting little objects, and I've never really been able to word quite what my relationship was with those things for a long time. And when I was 15, I fractured my skull, and I almost died. And when I woke up in hospital, I was blind for a while because there was a lot of pressure on my optic nerves because my head had swelled up. And I was sure I was dead. And in the darkness, I had to kind of cling to my sense of self. And that, on the inside of me, that looked like bringing all of these objects that meant something to me, and rebuilding them to create a story of self to hold on to then not die. But in reality, I wasn't going to die. I was just blind for a while. And after that, my relationship with objects increased. And then, after another near-death experience when I was 18, I felt like I had a real second chance at life. And the day after that, I was walking around and I saw some little bits of rubbish on the ground, and I was like moved to tears because there's like light on them. It was like a crisp wrapper or something, but covered in beads of dew, and it was really deeply moving. So in a sense, that kind of cracked a part of me open to a different way of being with objects. And so this afternoon I have a large suitcase that is open, full of things I've been collecting since I was 8, and I'm going to be moving those around in a kind of improvised ritual theatre, and creating small moments of sculpture that are quite fleeting. They kind of vanish as quickly as they arrive. And I'm going to be wearing this costume that I made, which is a kind of exoskeleton of scorpionic armour. And it's a new thing, so I'm not entirely sure what will happen, but I sing and talk, and it'll be hopefully a nice chaos. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah?
I noticed the other synchronicity about the submariners.
Yeah.
And I've just come back from the Raymond Buckland Museum in Cleveland, Ohio, and there was the artifact that your friend had in the living room with the alien.
Yes.
There was quite a few of those pieces in the museum. So I think synchronicity is just.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, but also you're a hotspot for it because you're the second one to call out the synchronicities.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, yeah, I noticed the submariners and those beings watching us. I thought, oh God, it's the guys from the thesis. When I was living and working for Ernst Fuchs, he was really good friends with GIGER. Yeah. And GIGER had given the woman I was living with, his Fuchs manager, we had this incredible table that he'd given her with all these sculptures underneath the glass thing. So you'd like go and you'd be sitting there, do you want a cup of tea? Yes, just put it down on this utter monster. Yeah. And then, like, it was quite bizarre.
Yeah,
I think to see that.
I think it's amazing as well how prolific all of Giger's imagery became, and then everyone more or less knows who he is and what that is. And so there's a kind of snow blindness to the potency of those things. You know, we're surrounded in certain situations when you see those things by these deeply scorpionic things that have come, you know, from right deep inside us. You know, largely made of those things that we occult. And I think that's just fascinating that it continues to kind of permeate reality. Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.